y'all. Welcome back to the RV Texas Y'all podcast.
I'm Stacy.
I'm Tom, and we're RV Texas Y'all.
We are native Texans and full-time RVers who are all about exploring the great state of Texas and beyond, one campground at a time. We're on a mission to experience life, not just live it, and we're bringing you along for the fun.
We're recording this episode at Fort Bayou Brewing Company. Yeah, that's a Harvest Host location in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. This is episode 25.
And this week we are talking all about the national parks, specifically RVing the national parks. Should you? Should you stay in the park? Should you not? That's the topic this week, so sit back, relax, and join us as we RV America, y'all. So yeah, before we jump into it this week, we are at a Harvest Host location. And we fit these in every so often on our travel. We are dry camping as we record this, so always a fun thing to do every so often. And maybe in the future we'll have an episode on Harvest Host and our experiences with that so far.
I have a feeling we will.
We've had a lot of different experiences, museums, breweries, all kinds of neat locations. So, but that will be another topic.
Yeah.
This week we're talking about the national parks, and a lot of people ask us about this because this is something, well, ourselves included, a lot of people got into RVing, at least in part, with the goal of visiting a lot of the national parks.
Yeah, for sure.
And so one of the big questions is, should you try to camp? Can you camp? What do you need to camp? Stay inside the national parks? Or is it better to stay outside and then go in for the day? And there's a lot that goes into answering that question.
Right. And before our travels last year, I would have answered that question saying, I think you always want to be inside the national park. But, we kind of found an instance last year where that may not be the case. And we're going to discuss that on this. But obviously people know that we've gone with a shorter RV to full-time in. We're 33 feet, 10 inches. The main purpose for that is so we can get into as many national parks and state parks and Corps of Engineer parks and all those River Authority parks as we can.
Right.
And it has worked very, very well to get us into these parks. And, of course, with our lithium and solar setup, too, is another reason why we did that is because a lot of the national parks are no hookups.
Right. And I think that's maybe an important place to start. Because there are some national park campgrounds, and by that we're talking RV-friendly campgrounds that are actually located inside the boundaries of a national park.
Yeah.
There are almost always options outside of the park, somewhere nearby, but for this, when we're talking about a national park campground, we're talking about inside, physically inside the national park. And a lot of those, there are some across the country that do have some type of hookup. There's a campground in Zion National Park, for example, that has electric hookups.
Right.
The Gulf Gorge campground in Hot Springs National Park in Arkansas has full hookups.
Yeah, and we've tried to make that several times. Something always comes up.
We will get there one of these days.
For sure. Absolutely. We've had it booked several times, yeah.
And in some cases, there are campgrounds that are run by concessionaires that are within the national park boundaries that do have hookups. One example, there is one of those campgrounds with hookups, an RV campground inside Grand Teton National Park.
That's right.
And then there is also dry camping in a more traditional national park campground setting within a few places inside Grand Teton. So, but if you are thinking of that you want to do a lot, you want to stay inside as many of the national parks as possible, then power and dry camping is going to have to be something you're really going to have to consider. Because
sure.
most of them do not have hookups.
Right. The good thing about some of the national parks, obviously not all of them, but like, let's take Yellowstone, for instance. Yellowstone, it's at such an elevation that even during the summer, it's cool in the evenings.
Right.
So, that makes it a lot easier to dry camp, cool in the evenings, put the windows down, go to bed. You don't need AC, so it's a lot easier to dry camp. You're just managing water pretty much. Your water and your tanks,
right? Your
sewer tanks. So let's kind of start with Yellowstone, because to me that's like the king of the kings. An incredible national park. If you've never been there, I mean, it's one that you have to put it on your must do. Even if you don't RV there, you've got to go to Yellowstone.
Everybody in this country, and even if you're listening from outside of the U.S., if you come to the U.S., if you are in the U.S., you need to visit Yellowstone National Park at least once in your life.
Yeah, it is one that's not unlike any other park in the world.
Absolutely.
But the thing about Yellowstone is it is so big that if you do not camp inside the park, and it also takes, coming into the park can take time checking in. You have to have a reservation, all that kind of stuff. And you may be able to get around the reservation system by going in real early or late in the afternoon, but you're still going to wait in line to get in, and the park is so big, you're hardly going to be able to go anywhere depending on what entrance you come in. There's several entrances to the park. It's so big. And yes, even if you stay inside Yellowstone, you're going to have some pretty long drives as well. I mean, if you want to go clear across the park, it could take you an hour and a half to 2 hours just to drive across the park when you're staying inside the park.
That's exactly right. And when we visited Yellowstone back in 2019, we were able to get campsites in 2 of their campgrounds. There are several campgrounds in Yellowstone that allow both tent and RV camping. There is one in particular, a campground that was being redone when we were there, and it has recently reopened, that has some hookups and allows some bigger rigs, and that is Fishing Bridge.
Yeah, it has full hookups.
And it is almost centrally located, kind of towards sort of the middle of Yellowstone, but even with that, like Tom said, it's so big, you're going to want to spend a good amount of time there so that you've got the time to go to a different part of the park each day.
Yeah, at minimum, if you can spend a full week, you can spend a full week and still not see it all.
Oh, for sure.
So if you have a big rig and you can get in, you get into Fishing Bridge, and you could be 45 feet. They have some accommodations for that.
We've got some friends that they're actually booked for a couple weeks.
Yes.
This summer in Fishing Bridge, which we are so jealous.
Oh, for sure. I mean, they're going to have a blast. I mean, and it's not just a blast. The things you see there, you will not see at any other park, probably in the world.
And you know what? Now, there are some fantastic campgrounds just outside of Yellowstone that are always an option. But The thing about staying inside the park in a place like Yellowstone is you are immersed in the park 24 hours a day.
Yep.
Like Tom said, you don't have to worry about waiting in line to come in the morning. And you might have the animals, the elk or the moose or what have you, walk right by you at your campground, at your campsite.
Yeah, and sometimes they have the ranger programs at night. And if you're staying outside, you're probably not going to do those
You're
programs.
going to be less likely for sure.
Right.
And they a lot of the parks, Yellowstone included, they have the ranger programs in an amphitheater at the campgrounds.
Right.
So by being at a campground, it's super convenient. You know, you're right there by where they're having it.
Yeah, we literally walked
Yes.
from our site to the amphitheater for ranger programs.
And that was at the Bridge Bay Campground. We've also done that at Dinosaur National Monument
right.
In Utah.
Yeah.
The ranger program, while we were there, was being held right next to the river, right in our campground.
So that's another major advantage of staying inside the national park, because most likely now you can do some ranger programs. They do have some during the day, but it really takes it up another notch when they do them at night, when you're sitting in total darkness and they're talking and showing a movie. And I mean, there's nothing like that. Those are my favorite ranger programs, are the ones at night.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Now, we were at Badlands National Park that same year, 2019. And by the way, Grammy Kay was with us for these adventures, my mom.
She was. Yep.
And when we were coming through the Badlands, and they also have a campground that is inside the park. But they had a lot of rain, and some of the campground was kind of holding some water, and we weren't really sure about hookups, electric connections and stuff at that point. It was going to be warm when we were there. So we opted to stay outside of the park at a campground just south of Badlands National Park. The thing about that was, okay, so we were in a site. We had full hookups. We were looking at the beautiful rock formations from our site, and we were only a mile from the south entrance. And just past that south entrance was the park campground where they had their ranger programs at night.
So we could actually get in. But, things have changed a little bit since those days, because back then there was no timed entry and all of that.
Well,
if you had your park pass, you could get in.
And the big difference between now and back then is a lot of the campgrounds in the national parks back then were first come, first serve.
Yes.
Now, most of them you need a reservation in advance through recreation.gov. Now, I think there's pluses and minuses to that. The minus, obviously, is you need to really plan in advance if you want to try to get a campsite within a national park campground.
This is a good time to give your tip on how they do that, because every national park, I believe, is a little different on how far in advance you can book them.
And, gosh, off the top of my head, guys, I meant to look this up. But, yeah, what you want to do when you know what parks you want to go to, you need to go to nps.gov, which is the National Park Service website, the official website. Look up the parks that you're interested in, and you will find information on their campgrounds. It'll give you information, too, on size of campsites, what amenities they have, if they have hookups or not, if they have ranger programs, dump station information, all of that. And you'll be able to... between that and their recreation.gov link for that particular park, you'll be able to see when they open reservations, how far in advance do they open reservations. So,
That's
for
important.
example, it is important because you need to know when you want to be there, and you need to know it several months in advance.
Right.
Because you need to, I believe it's either 8 or 9 a.m. Central. I forget exactly the time. You're going to need to check that out because it could change also.
Right.
But it's usually in the morning, so many months in advance of the day of you want to arrive. You need to be ready to be online and book your site. Now, the issue with that is If somebody else is getting there a couple days before that, they could have sites. There may not be anything that will come available that day. But what we did to try to speed ourselves up and to be able to hit, submit as soon as possible on reserving a site is we'd go in back when we were, months in advance as we were trying to figure out where we were going to go and when did we need to be online to book. We also spent time going through recreation.gov and doing searches for campsites in that park that we could fit in. For us, size is important. We're small by Class A standards. We're not small necessarily by RV standards.
For sure.
And so, you got to think of the height and the width and the length, and you got to look at pictures. A lot of times there'll be pictures that'll show you where the trees are around the campsite. It'll tell you how level it is a lot of times. So we went through and we would make a list, our top choices, our next tier choices, and then sites that were not going to be useful for us.
Right, and also just real quick, when you do this research, before you have to worry about reservations, make sure you can fit anyway, because there are some national parks that we don't even have to mess with even trying, because
Canyonlands is an example of that. When we were looking at doing the Utah national parks, we could fit in every national park in Utah except the major national parks, the 5, except for Canyonlands, and we were too big.
Right.
Now there's a state park outside that we could have opted for. And then there are private campgrounds, obviously, around the Moab area. So that is right. There's no point in worrying about what day the reservations are going to open if you're not going to fit in that park anyway.
Yeah. Check
so
that first.
That's something to know. And it's good to know in advance, too. Is there going to be one site that you have the option of fitting in, or are there going to be 20 sites that you have the option of fitting in? Because if there's only one available that's going to fit your rig or be right for what you need, then maybe you want to look for an alternative anyway, because that's going to be incredibly difficult to get.
Yeah.
Now, there are good and there are bad to staying within the national parks. The good thing, obviously, like we talked a little bit about with Yellowstone, is you are immersed in the park. You wake up and you are in the park. You don't have to worry about waiting in line, like we said, to get into some of the more popular parks.
You don't need a reservation.
You don't need a reservation. And that is a great thing. These parks right now, not all of the parks are requiring day entry reservations, but the ones that are. In our case last year, we went to Rocky Mountain National Park. It required a day reservation. Arches National Park required a day reservation. And so if you have a campsite that you are staying at within the park, you don't need a day reservation. So you can come and go, which is pretty fantastic.
That's awesome.
As much as you want. Now, if it is a busy park, you're going to have to wait in line to get, there's not a special line usually for folks who are camping inside the park. Every time you're coming and going, you may have to wait to come back in. But you are immersed in the park. Like we said, you're going to have wildlife that might be walking through your campsite or nearby. You're going to have easy access to ranger programs, even in the evening. You're going to have a lot of times amazing night skies. There is a lot to be said for the relaxation that comes with being in a national park.
Oh, and I think a plus, and some people may think it's a negative, but in many of these parks, you ain't going to get any reception on your phone.
That's true.
I mean, there may be little places in the park where you can get it, but in most of, like Yellowstone and stuff, that phone's going to be, you're not going to get on the internet and stuff.
And now maybe with Starlink and things that'll change.
Right,
but,
that's true.
That's for sure. That is something we actually look forward to, is being unplugged when we're staying inside a national park.
And you take the kids, you want them to get unplugged. Well, you can go to some of these national parks where it makes them be unplugged.
Absolutely. 100. There is nothing wrong with that, I tell you. You can also then do hikes, maybe early morning hikes, late evening hikes, and you don't have to get up as early or be out as long. So there's a lot of plus to being inside the national parks and just being immersed in the experience. Again, usually dry camping, so that's something you've got to think about. And some of the parks do not have dump stations, so that's something else you would want to plan ahead for.
Or water.
Water. Sometimes
fresh
you have
water.
to come with your tank full of fresh water. That's right. So you need to do your research, do your homework, and know ahead of time what you're getting into. If you need to stop ahead of time to fill up, or maybe fill up at the park that you're at before you get there, find a dump station. Know what you're going to do when you leave. That's important. Now, there's also some benefits to staying outside of the park. And like Tom said, before last year, we probably would have always said we always want to stay inside the national parks. But there have been some cases, we mentioned Badlands National Park being one, where we have opted to stay outside of the park at a private campground or a city park or something like that, state park locally, and to drive in for our day trips.
Yeah, and that one worked very well.
Yes, it did.
Because you were only a mile out of the park, and we had full hookups, so that was nice. We were with your mom, Grammy Kay, and so it was nice to have full hookups. But, of course, we did a lot of that trip without hookups, and Mom did fine. So, but still, it was nice to have them there, and there was no reservations at that time, so we got into the park relatively quickly.
Right.
So that was, a mile away. You're almost in the park.
Right.
And if there's not a line, then it's all, it really is like being inside the park.
Right. And so this past summer, we, like we said, had planned to do all of the major Utah national parks. We ended up changing our plans as we got closer to that time, weather really being a big concern for us. And the closer that we got to getting to, the one that we kept on our plans was Arches National Park. We were going to be 2 weeks in Moab. We had booked for the first week to be in the campground at Arches, inside Arches National Park. It was dry camping. We were really excited to get a site inside Arches. The campground is located in a beautiful, like stunningly beautiful part of Arches National Park.
Yes, it is.
But really all of Arches National Park is pretty darn amazing.
Yeah.
However, as we were getting closer to the time of being there, the weather reports kept getting hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. And, okay, now we know Utah is always hot in the summer. That's a known deal. We knew that when we booked it. Arches is rock. You're looking at some heat there during the summer. This was going to be September. Still very warm. But we decided, at that point that we wanted to kind of change things up, and we really wanted to explore more. Also, we wanted to do Arches, but we wanted to do a more in the town of Moab.
Yeah, and the campground within Arches is all the way to the end of the park. And so that's a long drive to get to it. So if we were going to try to experience some of Moab, it was going to take a long time each time that we were leaving Arches. And of course, we got Star and Astro. We don't want to leave them that long if we can help it. And just to get out of the park could take an hour, and to get in the park's another hour. So.
Yeah, you got to remember, in these parks, they're not only large in many cases, but you don't have high speed limits. You're going pretty slow.
Right.
You're going to be behind some folks coming or going that are going to be in there for the first time and just amazed by what they're seeing, and so they might be going slower than the speed limit.
We could be driving through there for the 10th time, and I'd want to go slow because the views are
absolutely
amazing.
Absolutely.
They are amazing.
And then again, so not only was the campground tucked way in the back of the park, and it would have taken a long time to get to the front of the park, but also going back into the park, there was always a line.
Big line.
So we decided to change our plans and let somebody else have that campsite, and we chose to stay in a public campground, RV park, the KOA.
Yeah,
for most
and
of the
it was
time.
nice.
It was super nice in Moab, and we were glad we made that choice.
Yes.
So there are definitely pluses and minuses to both experiences. And it really is, what do you want out of the experience? You know, are you wanting to really just get away and immerse yourself in the park? Are you wanting to use the park as part of your adventure and then do other things outside of the park as well? That's going to help you decide.
Yeah, because, you know, in some parks, too, if you're thinking, well, we want to stay outside the park because we want to go have dinner or whatever. Well, some of these national parks have those facilities inside.
Some of them do, yeah.
So, you know, like Yellowstone, they had several different restaurants and stuff within Yellowstone.
That's right.
So you can still go have meals and stuff even if you're staying in the park.
That's absolutely true.
That's worth looking into also.
And, you know, the other thing that we have learned along the way is when you're looking at camping in the national parks or near the national parks and exploring the national parks, and I highly, highly, highly recommend making this part of your adventure, don't look solely at the major national parks. The places like Rocky Mountain National Park and Arches and Yellowstone and Theodore Roosevelt National Park, which is one that a lot of people don't talk about. But I'm here to tell y'all, if you get up to North Dakota, you have got to see Theodore Roosevelt National Park. One of my favorites. However, what we have learned is that a lot of times the national monuments are almost or maybe as impressive as some of the national parks.
Yeah, it's hard to believe some of them that we've seen weren't national parks. I mean, they feel exactly like a national park. And they have, a lot of them have camping as well.
And Devil's Tower National Monument being one of those. We dry camped in the campground inside Devil's Tower.
Yeah, imagine if you've seen the beginning of any of our videos, our guess thing we play at the beginning of every video shows our campsite right there at Devil's Tower. And I tell you how cool it was to look up at the tower there and see people at night with their headlights on.
Oh, my gosh.
Coming down
Yeah,
Devil's
I don't
Tower.
think they're allowed to begin a climb after nightfall, but they can be up there and be coming down after the sun is set. And that was
cool.
It was very cool. Now, there is a campground, a public campground right outside of Devil's Tower. So if that was your thing, with hookups, but we dry camped inside the park. That was awesome. I would so do that again.
And of course, it saves money too.
Yeah, that's the thing. A lot of times, when you stay inside the national park, the campsites are less expensive. There are a few exceptions.
There are.
Yellowstone can get a little pricey depending on which campsite you're in, for example, because it is so popular. But it's still usually not the same amount of money as you would spend on a private RV park in the area.
I agree with that totally.
So it is a way to get camping for less money.
Yes.
And that is an important thing to consider for a lot of people. Now, we stayed in a city park looking at Scotts Bluff National Monument in Gering, Nebraska. The National Monument Scotts Bluff doesn't have camping.
Nope.
But the city park was, our view was Scotts Bluff.
We were
out of our
away.
windshield.
Yeah.
And it was awesome. And then we had... We stayed at a state park right outside Colorado National Monument.
Yeah.
And honestly, we didn't even realize Colorado National Monument was that close when we booked the state park.
Right, and then we had no idea it was as big as it was. That is one that could just about be a national park.
We completely underestimated the time we should have spent in Colorado National Monument, and we're going to have to go back because our visit there did not do it justice.
No, another stunning place.
And that is one of the big things. When you're visiting these parks, people get excited, and we're included in that. You want to see and go and do as many of them as you can, and when you get to an area where there are several within, say, a couple 100 miles or whatever, you want to go and just knock them all out and check them off your list. But it's not about checking them off your list. You want to have the experience.
Right.
You want to really be able to spend time there. And whether you're staying inside the park or outside the park, you want to be able to spend several days going in and exploring and just relaxing in the park and learning what makes that park special. Visit the visitor centers. Every single visitor center, even the parks that have multiple visitor centers, they're all different.
Yes.
They're all unique. They all talk about something special about that area. And so, we have our National Parks passport that we like to get, checked off. We like to go get our stamps at the visitor centers.
Yeah, you need to put that in the show notes again and how they could get one of those.
I will put that in the show notes.
That's really cool.
We love that because it is a great reference for us to look back and remember everywhere that we've been. And, we talked about the national monuments, but don't forget about the National Wildlife Refuges.
Yes.
The national recreation areas, like, the National Wildlife Refuge. We stayed at the...
in Oklahoma.
At Wichita Mountains.
Wow. You have no idea. When we got there, all of Oklahoma looked flat until we got there, and then all of a sudden there's these hills, and it was wonderful.
Incredible.
There. It was incredible.
Incredible. Yeah. The national recreation areas like Flaming Gorge National Recreation Area in Utah. So there are a lot of options. It's not all about the big national parks, but you need to be able to put them, don't just check them off your bucket list, go and experience them. Now, I also want to mention here that if you are looking at visiting one of our national parks, actually multiple national parks, then you really want to look at getting the America the Beautiful Pass, and that is the annual pass for the national parks and federal lands, and that will get you in free to all of our national parks. If you have the senior annual pass or the senior lifetime pass, then you also get half-price camping within the national parks.
We took advantage of that.
Yes, we did. And you also get half-price camping at places like Corps of Engineer parks, other federal parks. So that is definitely a great value. If you're a Gold Star family member or a veteran, you can look at the Military Lifetime Pass, which is absolutely free. Thank you for your service. And there are some other options as well. So I will put a link in the show notes to their passes page so you can see what's going to work best for you. I'll also put some links to some other resources that we use when we're deciding if we're going to stay in the national park campground or outside of the park. And it also helps us pick particular campsites. I'll put those resources in the show notes. Now we're about to jump back on I-10 and head east. We are going to South Louisiana. Cajun country, y'all. We are going to be going to the Cajun RV Rally. And next week, we're going to be doing our podcast from there. We're going to be joined by Don and Sandy Grutzmacher, who put on the rally every year. This is their 10th year. So we're excited to be going, excited to be joined by them. Come back next week. We'll talk to you then. Thanks for joining us, y'all. For more on what we talked about this week and to find other episodes, visit the podcast page of RVTexasYall.com. Subscribe to the RV Texas Y'all podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast app. And don't forget to join us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at RV Texas Y'all. Until next time, safe travels.
And happy camping.
Bye.